Over the last month, I have given my views on the 7 greatest attacking trios and back fours in football history, and to be honest, I was pretty happy with both. By using the system of ranking the players out of 10 for individual talent and the group out of 10 for how well they play together to give an overall score out of 20 which determined their rankings, I felt pretty confident with my selections. There were a lot of requests for today's video, which is why we're doing it, but although I have used exactly the same methodology here, it was much more difficult coming up with a definitive 7, so much so that I can't say I'm 100% happy with my final choices. As always, longevity isn't a factor. The 3 players simply must have played at least 1 season or 1 major tournament together if it's an international trio. As with the others, we have strictly enforced the trio part, so not just any 3 midfielders who play together are eligible. The trio has to make up the entire team's midfield, and we'll have some honourable mentions between 1st and 2nd place. Here are our 7 greatest midfield trios of all time. Makelele, Lampard and Essien. In a 7 packed full of selection headaches, 7th place was the ultimate migraine, and I won't argue with anyone who thinks 1 or 2 of our honourable mentions could come in for these 3. However, using our impeccable criteria, it's easy to see why they scored so highly. Claude Makelele, Frank Lampard and Michael Essien spent 3 seasons together forming a formidable midfield trio at Chelsea under Jose Mourinho. Makelele was the pivot in the so-called Makelele role, expertly breaking up play and snuffing out opposition attacks. Lampard was just so prolific, bagging 20 plus goals in each of these 3 seasons from the middle of the park, playing arguably the best football of his career. And then Essien was the perfect blend of the 2, such a powerful presence in midfield, bringing energy, dynamism and real quality. It's easy to forget just how good pre-injury trouble Essien was, and between 2005 and 2008, every one of this trio was named as either Chelsea's player or their player's player of the year. Brilliant as a unit and excellent individually, although we have 1 or 2 doubts about their inclusion, there can be no doubts about the overall quality of this combination. Casemiro, Kroos and Modric. The only current trio in this 7 is difficult to overlook the combined achievements of Casemiro, Kroos and Modric at the heart of the Real Madrid midfield. Casemiro is the deepest of the 3, the tough tackling and energetic Brazilian, bringing grit and resilience to a talented Real side. Kroos is just a class act. One of the best central midfielders in world football, the German rarely has to break a sweat, picking passes, opening teams up and controlling games as a deep line playmaker. And then we come to Luka Modric, for our money, the pick of the bunch. An attacking midfielder during his time in England, Modric has become a wonderfully complete footballer in the Spanish capital. He has a real engine, fantastic technique and a rare footballing brain. Although all 3 are top class, it is their complementing approaches and strengths which put them in our top 7. In 4 seasons together, they have won 4 Champions League titles, and although those successes are obviously very much team efforts, this trio were a huge contributing factor behind Real's continental success. Gattuso, Pirlo and Seedorf. That's right, it's the controversial choice siren, not because anyone would question Gattuso, Pirlo and Seedorf's ability, well, no one with any idea about football anyway, but because there's a very good case to be made that they played in a diamond, of which Kaká operated at the apex of. This was a tough one, and we may well have been being too lenient here, but Kaká was such an attack-minded playmaker who played just in behind the likes of Shevchenko and Crespo with so little defensive responsibility that we have decided to give this one the thumbs up. Once eligible, these 3 had to score very highly in terms of talent and togetherness. Gattuso was a tireless defensive midfielder who was a brilliant leader and spoiler of opposition attacks. Pirlo was a world-class deep-line playmaker with an almost unrivaled footballing intelligence and passing ability, while Seedorf just exuded class. Together, these 3 won 9 trophies in 9 years together, including 2 Champions Leagues, until AC Milan were foolish enough to allow Pirlo to leave on a free transfer to Juventus. Davids, Deschamps and Zidane. Staying in Italy, although there aren't actually any Italians in this trio, 4th place goes to Juventus' brilliant midfield trio of the mid to late 1990s. Teammates for 2 years in Turin, these 3 had a bit of everything. Deschamps was the least technically proficient of the 3, an industrious defensive midfielder, famously nicknamed the water carrier by Eric Cantona, but don't be fooled into thinking he wasn't a top class player. Deschamps was a fantastic leader with a brilliant defensive reading of the game. Alongside him was Edgar Davids, that feisty and untamable Dutch sensation. Davids had the energy of two players in the middle of the park, combining pace, power, and tenacity with good technique and the ability to spread play when called upon. Lastly, we come to Zinedine Zidane, a man who looked to have been born with the ball at his feet. I have been criticised for suggesting that Zidane is overrated by some, but only by those who either only saw or only remember his performances in key games and claim that he ought to be on a pedestal with the likes of Pele and Messi based on that. Make no mistake though, Zidane was a force of nature on his day. He was big and powerful, but incredibly graceful. He could beat players at will, turn a game on its head with a flick of a boot, and score huge goals on the biggest of stages. These three have to feature in this 7, despite all being shut out by Roy Keane in the 1999 Champions League semi-final, which is a mark of the Irishman's genius. Van Hanegem, Neeskens, and Janssen. When people talk about the great Netherlands side of 1974, the focus tends to be on Johan Cruyff, and understandably so. However, in Rinus Michels' fluid and revolutionary variation of a 4-3-3, that first three were pretty special too. That midfield was made up of Feyenoord legends Willem van Hanegem and Wim Janssen, and Ajax star Johan Neeskens. Unlike the others in this 7, this Dutch trio wasn't so much a case of one sitter and two playmakers, or two sitters and an attacking midfielder, with all three being pretty much interchangeable. Van Hanegem and Neeskens played similar roles for their club sides and worked brilliantly together. All three had fantastic energy and worked incredibly hard. Van Hanegem was an outstanding passer of the ball, Janssen was brilliant at reading the pattern of play, and Neeskens was a fairly regular scorer from midfield. Together, they reached the final of the 1974 World Cup, but more than that, they left an indomitable mark upon a generation of footballers and football fans who watched them play. Matthäus, Littbarski, and Hasler. If you look at most great midfield trios, there is someone who is basically there as a spoiler. In this 7, we've had the likes of Gattuso, Makelele, and Deschamps. Now, that isn't to diminish their talents or impact, a spoiler can be as important as the finest of playmakers, but none of this German trio were mere spoilers. We should start with Matthäus, who is the most celebrated, and the greatest defensive midfielder of the modern era in our eyes. Well, when he played in defensive midfield at least. Such a complete footballer, Matthäus could play anywhere in midfield. He was fiercely versatile and intelligent, a brilliant tackler, a wonderful passer, and a tireless runner. Pierre Littbarski spent much of his career playing further forward or out wide, but he played in alongside Hasler and Matthäus in central midfield when Germany won the World Cup in 1990. A genius with the ball at his feet, Littbarski was a sensational dribbler and a really creative footballer who spent most of his career at Cologne. And finally, Thomas Hasler was everything you want from an attacking midfielder. Diminutive, agile, technically excellent, a master passer and a free kick specialist. There was just no weak link in this German midfield, and they rightly take second place. The honourable mentions. Right, we'll try and make this quick because there's a lot to get through. From the 1920s to the present day, there were some quite brilliant midfield trios who missed out. We have to start with Uruguay's all-conquering midfield of the late 1920s and early 1930s, made up of Justido, Fernandez, and the best player on the planet at the time in the form of Jose Andrade. Similarly, Austria's Wunderteam of the decade that followed and their midfield trio of Urbanek, Schmistic, and Wagner were unfortunate to miss out. More recently, Liverpool may feel that their brief but brilliant trio of Mascherano, Alonso, and Gerrard warrants a mention, which is what they just got, and they did make our shortlist. Johan Neeskens may have made this 7 with his Dutch teammates, but the Ajax trio of himself, Arie Haan, and Jerry Murren wasn't far behind. We must give quick mentions to brilliant Juve trio Tardelli, Bonini, and Platini, two more Ajax combinations in the form of Davids, Seedorf, and De Boer, and Seedorf, Davids, and Litmanen, and Real Madrid's midfield 3 made up of Fernando Redondo, Clarence Seedorf, and Christian Karembeu. Lastly, there are a couple of suggestions that a few of you may think that we missed. They're actually overlooked since we don't consider them to be strict trios. They are England's wingless wonders from the 1966 World Cup of Peters, Stiles and Ball, who missed out since Bobby Charlton was very much a midfielder, so we can't call that a trio. And then the most notable of all, Brazil's 1970 combination of Rivellino, Gerson and Clodoaldo. All geniuses, but not a midfield trio, since Rivellino played on the left and Jairzinho played on the right, so it could be either a 4 or a 2, but not a 3. There are more we could name, but we'll stop there. As always, let us know your views and suggestions in the comments, as well as any future video ideas you may have, but first up, we come to top spot. Xavi, Iniesta, and Busquets. There shouldn't actually be too much debate about this one. Xavi, Iniesta and Busquets all rank among the finest players of their generation, and in tandem, they were simply irresistible. The only debate about their inclusion will be over whether they were a midfield trio, but we can quickly put that one to bed. Whilst they rarely operated as a trio for Spain, with Busquets normally having a sitter in alongside him like Xabi Alonso, and Iniesta often deputised on the left wing, they were very much a midfield three during Guardiola's reign as Barcelona manager. Busquets was the pivot, Iniesta dazzled on the left side of central midfield, while Xavi roamed around the field, constantly recycling possession, stretching the play, and waiting to pick off Barca's opponents. Xavi and Iniesta would both probably have won Ballon d'Ors if they played outside of the Messi and Ronaldo era, whilst Busquets is too subtle of a genius to be put up for awards like that, but he is among the 10 greatest defensive midfielders of all time. Individually, these three are as good as any other trio, and in terms of their chemistry and talents when operating in tangent, they're the best by a mile. In our eyes, Busquets, Xavi and Iniesta have to go down as the greatest midfield trio of all time. So that's it for our 7. Thanks for watching, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for more from us if you enjoyed the video, and you can now also follow us on Twitter for more ramblings from me. Our username is simply @HITC Sevens.